every week, we get new headlines surrounding the investigations into efforts by Donald Trump and his allies to overturn the 2020 election. Axios is reporting that a former conservative and well-respected federal judge who advised Mike Pence is expected to be a witness in the January 6th committee's public hearings. And in a different investigation into Donald Trump's attempts to remain in power, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is scheduled to testify before a special grand jury in Fulton County on Thursday about the infamous phone call he received from Trump asking him to find the votes necessary for Trump to win. There is always something new when it comes to these investigations. I know it can be hard to remember all of the threads, but this headline from March might have stuck with you. January 6th committee lays out potential criminal charges against Trump. That's when, in a court filing responding to Trump lawyer John Eastman's attempts to block a subpoena for documents in his possession, the January 6th committee said, quote, they had accumulated evidence demonstrating that Mr. Trump, the conservative lawyer John Eastman, and other allies could potentially be charged with criminal violations, including obstructing an official proceeding of Congress and conspiracy to defraud the American people. Later that month, the judge agreed, saying that these actions more likely than not constitute attempts to obstruct an official proceeding. That judge then ordered John Eastman to turn over documents to the 1-6 committee, and it referenced a not yet seen memo, writing, this may have been the first time members of President Trump's team transformed a legal interpretation of the Electoral Count Act into a day-by-day plan of action. The memo likely furthered the crimes of obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Well, after being hidden for months, the committee quietly released that key piece of evidence last week. The memo is now public for all of us to see. Joining me now is Kyle Cheney. He is the senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, who broke the news of this memo's release. He's also been closely following all of the developments surrounding January 6th and the attempts to overturn the 2020 election. And I will add right now to this intro, Kyle is definitely one of my go-to people to make sure that I am in the know when it comes to all things 1-6. So, Kyle, it is an honor to have you with us on today's show. Let's start with this newly released memo. Briefly, what does this memo say, and why is it so darn significant?
Sure. Well, thank you for those kind words, Katie, and it is good to be with you. This memo is, now look, we've heard John Eastman, if you've tracked his investigation, has his own infamous memos where he talks about what Vice President Pence should do on January 6th to try to help overturn the election or at least prevent Biden from taking office. What this earlier memo, it's a memo dated December 13th, 2020, and it's delivered to Rudy Giuliani by a lawyer that almost no one's ever heard of. His name is Kenneth Chesebro. I'm not sure how to even pronounce his name, but he was connected to the Donald Trump legal team and worked with Eastman and apparently laid out the first sort of plan of action for how to convince and pressure and get Mike Pence to actually take the actions that John Eastman would later include in his memo. So this seems to be sort of the origin point for not just the theoretical argument of could Pence do this, could he not do this, but how, if he's going to do it, how to make it happen, specifically what steps to take on each day leading up to January 6th and on the day itself.
Yeah, so Kyle, I want to stay on this memo a little bit. And frankly, anybody could go and they could go to the Political article and read it. I mean, this memo was originally sent on December 13th, 2020. So from the timeline, it's post-election, right? Pre-January 6th counting of and basically validation of the electoral count. It was originally sent by Chesebro, I guess, to Rudy Giuliani. So lest you think Rudy doesn't have his hands involved in this, Rudy Giuliani is involved. But it literally is a roadmap, Kyle. And so that federal judge we talked about in the intro to your segment, he's ruled that this memo is subject to the crime fraud exception, which basically means you don't even get to assert attorney-client privilege for documents that may have been used in the commission of a crime. So what is the significance? Let's expand this a little bit, Kyle. What's the significance of this memo as it relates to the 1-6 investigations and ultimately Donald Trump's culpability? Because you know that's what people are really heavily focusing on.
Right, and I think so. If the judge's theory, and I think it's one the committee has embraced and laid out, is that what Donald Trump did essentially was commit a crime to obstruct Congress, to try to prevent Congress from fulfilling its lawful and constitutional duty to validate the results of the election. And normally you think of that kind of obstruction as, intimidating a witness or destroying documents. Here they're saying through these quasi-legal maneuvers, getting people like John Eastman and Kenneth Chesebro to come up with concoct this fringe theory that could be potentially perceived as legitimate, but really had no legal underpinnings. They did the same thing as if they had destroyed documents or intimidated witnesses to block Congress from finalizing this election. And what the memo really is the genesis of that. It's the here's the step that Mike Pence has to do. And it literally says he should disregard aspects of the Electoral Count Act, which is the law on the books that governs this process. And I think that's where the potential crime could happen, and they're pressuring and suborning and encouraging Pence to violate provisions of that law, and leaning on him to do so.
Yeah, so it's leaning on Mike Pence to defraud the United States. And that's a phrase that sticks out time and time again during the course of this litigation. As I mentioned, Axios reported on Wednesday that the former federal judge who advised Mike Pence, J. Michael Luttig, is expected to testify in the 1-6 committee's public hearings. Talk to us a little bit, Kyle, about why Luttig is being described as a, quote, blockbuster witness in this case.
Sure. Now, he's a sort of paragon of conservative legal scholarship. And so he's someone who I believe Ted Cruz clerked for, and I think Eastman has relationships with him as well. And so he's not someone who is just going to parrot the select committee's preferred line. And again, Mike Pence turned to him in this moment of chaos and crisis and said, "What is your legal advice here on what I should do?" And essentially he said, here's why you have no power to overturn this election. And Pence relied on that advice when he issued his statement, his very fateful statement on January 6th, saying, I'm not going to do what Donald Trump has been asking me to do. And so Luttig was in the mix right up at that very crucial moment, and has since then come out and really sounded the alarm on what these sort of fringe legal arguments could mean for the future. So I think he's important because he has sway among conservatives, but is also, clearly, sounding again a big warning about what could happen if Donald Trump and that school of thought were carried out to its, logical conclusion.
Well, Kyle, the culmination of the 1-6 committee's investigation is about to begin. I urge everybody to follow you on social media to know exactly what's going on. I know you've been closely following this for 18 months plus, so we thank you for your time and for being here today.
Thank you for having me.